The September wind felt cold against 12-year-old Isabella's face as she sat on the sidewalk in downtown Chicago. Her jacket was too thin for the weather, but it was the only one she had. She didn't mind the cold much anymore. When you're focused on something you love, you forget about being uncomfortable. Her canvas today was a piece of flattened cardboard box that she'd found behind a grocery store. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Her tools were even simpler, just 5 colored pencils that were worn down to stubs. 3 of them didn't even have erasers anymore. But in Isabella's hands, these simple things became magic. She was drawing the city skyline from memory. Every building, every window, every tiny detail that most people walked past without noticing. Isabella noticed everything. That's what made her different. While other people rushed through their busy lives, she saw the beauty in ordinary things. The way sunlight hit the glass buildings, the pattern of clouds above the skyscrapers, the pigeons that gathered near the fountain. People walked past her all morning. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Business people in suits checking their phones, teenagers laughing in groups, families with shopping bags. Almost nobody looked at her. To them, she was invisible, just another homeless kid sitting on the street. Those who did look often whispered to each other. Isabella could hear them sometimes. "Poor thing," they'd say, shaking their heads. But they never stopped. They never asked if she was okay or if she needed help. They just kept walking, making her feel even more invisible than before. Around noon, a group of teenagers walked by. They were probably 15 or 16 years old, carrying expensive backpacks and wearing brand new sneakers. One of them noticed Isabella and pointed at her mismatched shoes. One shoe was blue, the other was brown. They didn't match because they came from different donation boxes at the shelter. "Look at that," one of the boys said loudly, making sure his friends could hear. "She thinks she's an artist or something." His friends laughed. A girl in the group took out her phone like she was going to take a picture. "That's so sad," she said, but not in a kind way. In a way that made Isabella feel small and ashamed. Another boy bent down to look at her drawing, but not because he was interested. "You call that art?" he said, smirking. "My little sister draws better than that, and she's 6 years old." They all laughed again and walked away, their voices fading as they disappeared into the crowd. Isabella's cheeks burned red, her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry, not here, not in front of all these people. Instead, she kept drawing, her hand moving across the cardboard even though it was shaking a little. Art was the only thing that made her feel like she mattered. It was the only thing that made her feel like she was good at something. The truth was, Isabella and her mother had been living in a shelter for 3 months now. Before that, they'd had a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms, but it was home. Then her father died 2 years ago and everything fell apart. Medical bills piled up. Her mother worked 2 jobs, but it still wasn't enough. One day they came home and found an eviction notice on their door. Just like that, they had nowhere to go. Her mother tried so hard to keep things normal. She still made sure Isabella went to school. She still smiled and told her everything would be okay. But Isabella saw the worry in her eyes. She heard her mother crying at night when she thought Isabella was asleep. That's why Isabella came out here to draw. If she could sell even 1 drawing, it might help. Even a few dollars could buy food or medicine. The shelter was crowded and noisy. Dozens of families all crammed into one big room, separated only by thin curtains. Privacy didn't exist there. Neither did quiet. Isabella couldn't think there, she couldn't dream. So she came out to the streets during the day, where at least she could breathe and create something beautiful. There was one person who was kind to her, though. An elderly woman named Mrs. Liu, who owned a small bakery on the corner. Every day she would bring Isabella bread that didn't sell the day before, sometimes a cookie or a muffin. "You need to keep your strength up," she'd say with a warm smile. "Artists need to eat too." Mrs. Liu was the only person who treated Isabella like she was worth something. She would stop and look at Isabella's drawings, really look at them, and say things like, "You have a gift, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Isabella didn't really believe her. Mrs. Liu was just being nice because she felt sorry for her. That's what Isabella told herself anyway. Today, Isabella had finished 3 drawings. One was a portrait of Mrs. Liu herself, drawn from memory. She'd captured the kind wrinkles around her eyes, the way she always wore her hair in a neat bun, the gentle expression that made everyone feel welcome in her bakery. The second was the Chicago skyline at sunset, with colors that seemed to glow even though they were just colored pencil. The third was a small sparrow she'd watched that morning, sitting on a bench and chirping happily despite the cold. As the afternoon sun started to sink lower in the sky, Isabella knew it was time to pack up. She carefully placed her 3 precious pencils back into her pencil case, which was really just an old zipper pouch that was falling apart. She rolled up her drawings gently so they wouldn't crease or tear. These weren't just pictures to her. They were pieces of her heart, her hope, her dreams. Tomorrow she would come back and try to sell them. Maybe someone would want the portrait for $5, maybe the skyline for $10. If she was really lucky, she might make $15 total. That could buy the cough medicine her mother needed. Her cough had been getting worse, and it scared Isabella. She couldn't lose her mother too. She just couldn't. Isabella stood up, brushing the dirt off her worn jeans. Her legs were stiff from sitting on the hard concrete all day. She picked up her cardboard canvas and tucked it under her arm, then started the long walk back to the shelter. The streets were getting busier as people left work and headed home. Home. Isabella tried to remember what that word felt like. As she walked, she passed by a fancy art gallery with bright lights and people in expensive clothes sipping wine. Through the window, she could see paintings on the walls with little price tags. She couldn't read them from outside, but she knew they probably cost more money than she'd ever seen in her life. Those were real artists in there. People who went to art school and had studios and got to use real paints and real canvases. Isabella looked down at her rolled-up cardboard drawings. Maybe those teenagers were right. Maybe she was just a homeless kid pretending to be an artist. Maybe dreams were only for people who could afford them. She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away. Mrs. Liu believed in her. That had to count for something, right? What Isabella didn't know was that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow someone would stop and really see her work. Someone who understood art in ways she couldn't imagine. Someone who would change her entire life. But tonight she was just a tired, cold 12-year-old girl walking back to a shelter, holding on to her dreams with colored, pencil-stained fingers, hoping that someday, somehow, things would get better. The next morning felt different somehow. Isabella couldn't explain it, but something in the air seemed to whisper that today wouldn't be like yesterday. Maybe it was just hope talking. Or maybe it was desperation. Her mother had been coughing all night, and they really needed money for medicine. Isabella returned to her usual spot on the sidewalk, the same piece of concrete she'd claimed as her own little studio. She spread out her 3 drawings carefully on the cardboard, arranging them so people walking by could see them. The portrait of Mrs. Liu, the Chicago skyline, the little sparrow. Each one represented hours of work, of pouring her heart onto cardboard with stub pencils. The morning started slow. People rushed past like always, barely glancing down. A businessman almost stepped on her skyline drawing, and Isabella had to pull it away quickly. He didn't even notice, didn't apologize, just kept walking while talking loudly on his phone about some important meeting. Around 11 o'clock, Isabella noticed something unusual. A sleek black car pulled up nearby and parked. It was the kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood. The kind that screamed money and success, tinted windows, chrome wheels, probably cost more than most people made in a year. For a moment, nothing happened. The car just sat there, engine running quietly. Then the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was probably in his 50s, Isabella guessed. Tall, gray hair that looked expensive somehow, like he paid someone a lot of money to make it look that perfect. His suit was charcoal gray and fit him like it was made just for his body, which it probably was. Isabella's first instinct was to gather up her drawings and move. Rich people didn't stop in neighborhoods like this unless they were lost or looking for trouble. But before she could move, the man started walking, not toward his car, toward her. Her heart started beating faster. Was she in trouble? Was he going to yell at her for sitting here? Tell her to move along? She'd been yelled at before by people who thought she made the street look bad. She braced herself for harsh words. But the man didn't yell. He didn't even speak at first. He just stopped right in front of her drawings and stood there completely still. His eyes moved from one drawing to another, studying them carefully. Not the quick glance most people gave, really looking. Really seeing. Isabella didn't know what to do. She sat frozen watching him. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. The man crouched down, getting closer to her work. He tilted his head slightly, examining the portrait of Mrs. Liu. Then he moved to the skyline, his eyes tracing every line, every building, every tiny detail she'd included. Did you create these? His voice surprised her. It wasn't harsh or judgmental. It was gentle, curious. He looked at her directly, and Isabella saw something in his eyes that she rarely saw from strangers. Genuine interest, yes, sir, she managed to whisper. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. She cleared her throat. I drew them yesterday. How old are you? He asked, still studying the drawings. 12. The man's eyebrows raised slightly. He stood up, then crouched back down again, this time looking at the sparrow drawing. He was quiet for another long moment, and Isabella's mind raced. What was he thinking? Was he going to buy one? Was he just curious? Was this some kind of joke? What's your name? He finally asked. Isabella Rodriguez, sir. Isabella, he repeated like he was testing how it sounded. These are remarkable. Truly remarkable. He pulled out his phone, and Isabella's stomach dropped. Was he taking pictures to make fun of her online? To show his rich friends the homeless kid pretending to be an artist? But he wasn't taking pictures. He was making a call. Jennifer? Yes, it's me. Cancel my afternoon meetings. He paused, listening. All of them. Yes, I'm serious. Something came up, another pause. And call the Art Institute. Tell them I'm bringing someone they need to meet. Isabella's mind was spinning. The Art Institute. That was one of the most famous art museums in Chicago. What was he talking about? The man ended his call and looked at her again. Isabella, I'd like to buy all 3 of these drawings. Would $500 be fair? The world seemed to stop spinning. $500? That couldn't be right. She must have heard wrong. I'm sorry, what? She stammered. $500. For all 3. He was already pulling out his wallet. A leather thing that probably cost more than everything Isabella owned combined. Though honestly, they're worth far more than that. But it's what I have in cash at the moment. Isabella's hands were shaking. $500 would pay for her mother's medicine. And food. And maybe even help with rent so they could get out of the shelter. But this had to be a trick. Rich people didn't just give homeless kids hundreds of dollars. But they're just colored pencil drawings, she said quietly. They're not even on real paper. The man smiled, and it reached his eyes. They're art. Real art. And do you know what makes art valuable, Isabella? It's not the materials. It's the vision. The emotion. The skill. You have all 3. He counted out 5 crisp $100 bills and held them out to her. Isabella stared at them, afraid to touch them. Afraid this was a dream, and she'd wake up back at the shelter with nothing. Take them, he said gently. You earned this. With trembling hands, Isabella reached out and took the money. It felt real, heavy, more money than she'd ever held in her entire life. Tears started rolling down her cheeks before she could stop them. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, the man said. Because I have another question for you. How would you feel about taking real art lessons? Learning from professional instructors? Isabella couldn't speak. She literally couldn't form words. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to kids like her. They happened in movies, in fairy tales. Not in real life. The man seemed to understand her shock. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. My name is David Wellington. I'm a collector. I invest in talented artists. And Isabella, you are incredibly talented. I can see it in your work. He pointed to the portrait. The way you captured emotion in this woman's face. The warmth. The kindness. That's not something you can teach. He moved his finger to the skyline. And this. The way you used color to show the time of day. The shadows on the buildings. The perspective. You understand light and space instinctively. Most artists study for years to achieve what you're doing naturally. Isabella wiped her tears with her sleeve. I just draw what I see, what I feel. Exactly, David said. That's what makes you special. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're creating from your heart. That's rare, precious even. He stood up and Isabella suddenly realized how tall he was, how different their worlds were. He probably had a huge house somewhere, maybe multiple houses. He'd never known what it felt like to be hungry or cold or invisible, but here he was treating her like she mattered. Like her art mattered. I'd like to help you if you'll let me, David continued. I know some excellent instructors who work with young artists. People who can teach you technique while preserving that natural talent you have. What do you think? What did she think? Isabella thought she must be dreaming. She thought this man had to be an angel or a miracle or something impossible, because people like him didn't stop for people like her. The world didn't work that way. Why? The question came out before she could stop it.
Why would you help me?
You don't even know me. David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When I was young, someone gave me a chance when nobody else would. They saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. They invested in me, believed in me, and it changed my life. I've been looking for a way to pay that forward ever since. He smiled. And then I saw your art and I knew, this is it. You're it. Isabella looked down at the $500 in her hand, then at her colored pencils, then back at David. Her whole life she'd been told she was nothing. Less than nothing. A burden, a problem, a homeless kid in the way. But this man, this stranger, saw something different when he looked at her. He saw an artist. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like to learn. To get better. David's smile grew wider. Excellent. Do you have a parent or guardian I can speak with? I want to do this properly. With permission and everything official. My mother, Isabella said. She's at work right now, but she gets off at 6. We're staying at the shelter on 5th Street. I'll meet you there at 6:30, David said. We'll discuss everything with your mother, answer any questions, and figure out the next steps together. He picked up her 3 drawings carefully. And I'll take very good care of these. They're going to hang in my office where everyone can see them. As David walked back to his car, Isabella sat there in shock, clutching $500 and a business card that might just change everything. She looked up at the sky, wondering if her father was watching somehow. Wondering if he'd had something to do with sending this miracle her way. For the first time in 3 months, Isabella felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Real, solid, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Isabella couldn't sit still for the rest of the day. She walked back to the shelter, clutching the $500 like her life depended on it. Because in a way it did. This money meant medicine for her mother. Food that wasn't from donation boxes. Maybe even new shoes that actually matched. But more than the money, it was what David had said that kept playing in her mind. He called her talented, remarkable. He said her art was worth something. Not just the drawings themselves, but her, Isabella, the invisible girl that everyone walked past. Someone finally saw her. When her mother came home from her second job that evening, exhausted and coughing, Isabella practically jumped on her. Mom, you won't believe what happened. She pulled out the money, spreading the bills on the thin shelter cot they shared. Look. Her mother's eyes went wide with fear first, not joy. Isabella, where did you get this? Please tell me you didn't do anything. No, Mom, nothing like that. Isabella quickly explained everything. About David stopping to look at her drawings. About him buying all 3. About the art lessons he wanted to offer. The words tumbled out so fast she could barely breathe between sentences. Her mother sat down slowly on the cot, staring at the money, then at Isabella, then back at the money. A stranger just gave you $500? The worry in her voice was clear. Baby, that doesn't sound right. People don't just do that. He's real, Mom. Look, he gave me his business card. He said he'd come here at 6:30 to talk to you about everything. To do it properly. Isabella handed her the card. Her mother studied it carefully, turning it over in her hands. David Wellington, she read aloud. CEO, Wellington Industries. She looked up at Isabella. This is a very powerful man, Mija. Are you sure he didn't want anything else? Didn't ask you to go anywhere with him? No, Mom, he just looked at my drawings. He said I was talented. He wants to help me take art lessons, but he said everything has to be official and with your permission. He seemed really nice, honest. Her mother pulled Isabella close, hugging her tight. Okay, we'll meet with him. But I'll be watching him very carefully. If anything feels wrong, we walk away. Deal? Deal, Isabella agreed, though she couldn't imagine anything feeling wrong about this. For the first time in forever, something felt right. At exactly 6:30, David arrived at the shelter. He didn't look uncomfortable or out of place like most wealthy people did when they visited. He simply walked in, found Isabella and her mother, and extended his hand. "You must be Mrs. Rodriguez. I'm David Wellington. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Isabella's mother shook his hand cautiously. "My daughter told me what you did today. That was very generous, but I need to understand why. Why would you want to help us?" David didn't seem offended by her directness. Instead, he smiled. "That's exactly what a good mother should ask. May we sit somewhere and talk?" They found a quiet corner of the shelter, as quiet as anywhere could be in a building filled with dozens of families. David explained everything clearly. His background as an art collector, how he'd discovered other young artists over the years, the instructors he knew who specialized in working with talented children. He even pulled out his phone and showed them photos of his office where Isabella's 3 drawings were already hanging on the wall. "I'm not asking for anything in return," David said firmly. "No contracts. No strings attached. I simply believe that talent like Isabella's deserves to be nurtured. She has something special, and it would be a tragedy to let it go to waste because of circumstances beyond her control." Isabella's mother was quiet for a long moment. "We don't take charity," she finally said, her voice soft but proud. "We've never asked anyone for handouts." "This isn't charity," David replied gently. "This is an investment in an artist. I buy art from people I believe in. I bought Isabella's work today because it moved me. The lessons I'm offering are simply part of supporting an artist whose career I want to follow." He leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I can see you're a hard worker. I can see you've done everything possible to take care of your daughter. But sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Let me do this. Not because you need charity, but because Isabella deserves a chance to develop her gift." Tears started rolling down her mother's cheeks. She quickly wiped them away, not wanting to cry in front of a stranger. But Isabella could see the weight lifting off her shoulders. The constant stress of trying to survive, of trying to give her daughter a better life, of feeling like she was failing. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. "Okay," her mother whispered. "Okay, but I want everything in writing. I want to know exactly what these lessons involve, where they'll be, who will be teaching her. I need to know my daughter will be safe." "Absolutely," David agreed. "I wouldn't expect anything less. I'll have my assistant draw up all the details. You'll have full information about everything." Over the next 2 weeks, David kept every promise he'd made. The art lessons were arranged at the Chicago Art Institute, one of the most prestigious places in the city. Isabella would go every Saturday morning, learning from a woman named Professor Chen who had taught art for 30 years. But David did something else too. Something Isabella and her mother didn't expect. He helped them find an apartment. Not a fancy place, just a small 2-bedroom in a safe neighborhood. "I can't stand the thought of Isabella trying to learn art while living in a shelter," he explained. "Creativity needs space to breathe." Isabella's mother tried to refuse at first. It was too much. They couldn't accept this. But David was persistent. "Consider it part of my investment in Isabella's future. An artist needs a studio, or at least a quiet place to work. This isn't charity. It's providing the right environment for talent to grow." The day they moved into their new apartment, Isabella stood in the middle of the small living room and cried. Real walls instead of curtains. A door that closed. Privacy, quiet. A window where sunlight came through. Her own bedroom with a desk where she could draw. Her mother set up the desk near the window and stocked it with supplies David had sent. Real sketch pads. Professional colored pencils, not the cheap stubs she'd been using. Charcoal, pastels, different types of paper. It was like Christmas and her birthday and every good thing combined into one moment. But the real magic happened on that first Saturday when Isabella walked into the Art Institute for her first lesson. The building itself was intimidating. Huge stone columns, marble floors, famous paintings on every wall, people in expensive clothes walking around discussing art and voices that sounded educated and important. Isabella felt out of place immediately. She was wearing clean clothes, but they were still obviously cheap. Her shoes were still the mismatched pair from before. Everyone else looked like they belonged there. She felt like an imposter. Professor Chen found her standing frozen in the hallway. "You must be Isabella," she said warmly. "David told me all about you. Come, let me show you the studio." The studio was filled with light. Windows covered one entire wall. Easels were set up in rows. Art supplies lined the shelves. Other students were already there, kids around Isabella's age, some older. They looked at her curiously as she walked in, and Isabella felt her cheeks burn. "Everyone, this is Isabella," Professor Chen announced. "She's joining our Saturday sessions. Please make her feel welcome." She turned to Isabella and lowered her voice. "Don't worry about them. In a few weeks, they'll be asking you for advice. David showed me your work. You have something these kids are still trying to learn." Over the following weeks, Isabella discovered what it meant to be taught by someone who truly understood art. Professor Chen didn't just show her techniques. She taught her how to see the world differently, how to capture not just what something looked like, but what it felt like. How to tell stories through images. The other students were a mix. Some were welcoming. Others were cold, clearly coming from wealthy families and not sure what to make of this quiet girl who'd come from nowhere. But Isabella didn't care. She was there to learn, and she absorbed everything like a sponge. David visited sometimes, stopping by the studio to see how she was progressing. He never made a big deal of it. Just quietly observed, occasionally offering encouragement. "You're growing," he'd say simply. "Keep going." But not everyone was happy about Isabella's sudden good fortune. One Saturday, as she was working on a portrait, two girls from the class approached her. They were both dressed in expensive clothes, their supplies clearly top of the line. "So you're the charity case," one of them said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "The homeless girl that David Wellington rescued. How does it feel to be someone's pet project?" Isabella's hand froze on her sketchpad. The old shame tried to creep back in, the feeling of being less than everyone else, of not belonging. But then she remembered something. Her art had value. David hadn't helped her out of pity. He'd helped her because she was talented, because she deserved to be here. She looked up at the girls and smiled calmly. "It feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said quietly. "And if being humble enough to accept help when it's offered makes me a charity case, then I'll wear that label proudly." The girls didn't know how to respond to that. They walked away whispering to each other, but Isabella didn't care. She went back to her drawing, her hand steady, her heart sure. She belonged here, not because of where she came from, but because of where she was going. 3 months passed like a beautiful dream that Isabella kept waiting to wake up from. But it wasn't a dream. Every Saturday morning she walked into the Art Institute and learned something new. Every evening she practiced in her small bedroom, filling page after page with drawings and paintings that got better each week. Professor Chen was an incredible teacher. She pushed Isabella hard, but never made her feel bad when she struggled. "Mistakes are how we learn," she'd say whenever Isabella got frustrated. "The only real failure is giving up." The improvement was obvious. Isabella's portraits now captured not just faces but personalities. Her landscapes felt alive, like you could step into them. Her use of color had grown bolder, more confident. She was learning to trust herself, to take risks, to pour more of her heart into every piece. David stopped by every few weeks to check on her progress. He'd walk through the studio, hands behind his back, studying what all the students were creating. But he always spent the most time at Isabella's easel. "Remarkable," he'd murmur, shaking his head with a smile. "Absolutely remarkable." One Saturday in December, David pulled Professor Chen aside after class. Isabella couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw them looking at her work, nodding seriously. When David left, Professor Chen called Isabella over with a huge grin on her face. "How would you feel about having your first real exhibition?" she asked. Isabella's heart skipped. "Exhibition? Like in a gallery?" "Better than that. At the Art Institute itself, David wants to organize a show featuring your work. Both your early pieces from the street and your recent work from class. He thinks people need to see your journey, your growth." Isabella felt dizzy. An exhibition? Her work hanging in the same building where famous artists were displayed? "But I'm just a student." "I'm still learning." Professor Chen put a hand on her shoulder. "Isabella, you need to understand something. You're not just any student. What you've accomplished in 3 months would take most people 3 years. Your early work was raw but powerful. Your new work is refined and stunning. Together they tell an incredible story. People need to see that story. That night, Isabella could barely sleep. An exhibition. Her own exhibition. At the Art Institute. It felt impossible. Kids like her didn't get exhibitions at prestigious museums. But then again, kids like her weren't supposed to get discovered by millionaire art collectors either. Maybe impossible things were becoming possible. Over the next few weeks, preparations began. David handled everything with the same quiet efficiency he brought to his business. He hired professionals to frame Isabella's work properly. He worked with the Institute's curators to design the exhibition space. He even hired a photographer to document everything. But word started spreading around Chicago's art community about the upcoming show. A 12-year-old former homeless girl having an exhibition at the Art Institute. It was unusual, controversial even. Some people thought it was wonderful. Others thought it was a publicity stunt. Isabella overheard two adults talking at the Institute one Saturday. "It's exploitation," one woman said, her voice sharp with judgment. "Using that poor girl's sob story to sell art, it's disgusting." "Oh, I don't know," her companion replied. "Maybe she's actually talented. Please. David Wellington is just doing this to make himself look good, playing the hero. That girl probably has no real talent at all." Isabella's face burned. She wanted to run away to hide. But Professor Chen had seen her reaction. "Don't listen to them," she said quietly. "People who create nothing always criticize those who create everything. Your work speaks for itself. Remember that." The criticism got worse as the exhibition date approached. A local art blogger wrote a scathing article questioning whether Isabella was truly talented or just a charity case being pushed by a wealthy benefactor. The comments section filled with people debating her worthiness, most of them having never seen her work. Isabella's mother noticed her daughter getting quieter, more withdrawn. "What's wrong, Mia?" she asked one evening. "What if they're right?" Isabella whispered. "What if I'm not really good? What if David just felt sorry for me, and now everyone's going to see that I'm a fraud?" Her mother sat beside her and took both her hands. "Listen to me. I've watched you draw since you were 5 years old. I've seen you create beauty out of nothing, hope out of despair. Your talent isn't something David gave you. It was always there. He just helped the world see it. Don't let other people's doubts become your own." The night before the exhibition opening, David invited Isabella and her mother to see the completed setup. When they walked into the gallery space, Isabella gasped. Her drawings and paintings hung on pristine white walls under perfect lighting. The exhibition was split into two sections. The left side showed her early work, the colored pencil drawings on cardboard from the street. The right side displayed her recent pieces, done on proper canvas and paper with professional materials. In the middle was a large text panel that told her story. Not to exploit her, but to provide context, to show that art isn't just about expensive education and perfect circumstances. Sometimes it's about raw passion and determination, and refusing to give up even when the world tells you you're invisible. David stood beside her, watching her take it all in. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "I think I'm terrified," Isabella admitted. David smiled. "Good, that means you care. That means it matters to you. Never lose that feeling, Isabella. The day you stop being nervous about sharing your work is the day you stop putting your heart into it." The next evening was the opening reception. Isabella wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Liu had helped her mother pick out. Nothing fancy, but it was new and clean and made her feel like maybe she could belong in a place like this. Her mother stayed close beside her, both of them nervous and excited. People started arriving at 6 o'clock. Art collectors, critics, journalists, students, teachers, curious locals who'd heard about the exhibition. The gallery filled quickly, voices echoing off the walls as people moved from piece to piece. Isabella stood in the corner, watching. Some people loved her work immediately. She could see it in their faces, the way they leaned in close to study each detail, the way they smiled or nodded or whispered to their companions. Others were more skeptical, arms crossed, faces neutral, clearly trying to decide if she was the real deal or just hype. Then the people from that day on the street started arriving. The businessman who had almost stepped on her drawing walked in, checking his phone, barely paying attention. The two wealthy women who had mocked David for looking at street trash entered wearing expensive jewelry and fake smiles. But most painful of all were the teenagers, who had laughed at her that September day. They walked in with their parents, looking bored and entitled. probably forced to attend by families who wanted to seem cultured. One of them, the boy who'd said his 6-year-old sister drew better, stopped in front of Isabella's street portrait of Mrs. Liu. He stared at it for a long moment, reading the description card that explained it had been drawn with colored pencils on cardboard, while Isabella was homeless. His face changed. The smug confidence melted into something else. Embarrassment, maybe, or shame. He looked around the gallery, his eyes landing on Isabella standing in her simple blue dress. Recognition flickered across his face. He remembered her, and he remembered what he'd said. The businessman noticed Isabella's skyline drawing and actually stopped scrolling on his phone. He put it away and stepped closer, really looking at the piece. Isabella watched him read the description, watched his eyebrows raise when he realized this was the same girl whose cardboard he'd nearly stepped on months ago. One of the wealthy women approached David, who was standing near the entrance greeting guests. "David, darling," she said, her voice dripping with the same condescension Isabella remembered. "This is quite the interesting exhibition. Very charitable of you." David's expression hardened slightly. "Charitable? No, Patricia. This is business. I invested in a talented artist, and I'm showcasing work that I believe has significant value. There's nothing charitable about recognizing talent when you see it. But surely you must admit this is partly about the story, the circumstances." "The circumstances explain the medium," David replied coolly. "Colored pencils and cardboard instead of oil and canvas. But the talent? That has nothing to do with circumstances. That's pure gift. And if you can't see that, then perhaps you're not looking at the art. You're looking at your own prejudices." Patricia's face flushed red. She turned and walked away, but David's words carried. Other people had heard him. They looked at Isabella's work with fresh eyes, setting aside their assumptions. A well-dressed critic with a notebook stopped in front of Isabella's newest piece, a painting of the shelter where she and her mother had lived. It wasn't sad or depressing. Instead, Isabella had captured moments of humanity. A mother braiding her daughter's hair, an old man sharing his dinner with a young boy, people helping each other survive. The painting glowed with warmth despite depicting hardship. The critic wrote something in his notebook, nodding slowly. Then he spotted Isabella and walked over. "You're the artist?" he asked. Isabella nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "You have an extraordinary gift," he said simply. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And don't let this world make you forget where you came from. That perspective, that understanding of struggle and hope, that's what makes your work powerful. Never lose that." As the evening continued, something shifted in the gallery. The skeptics became believers. The mockers became silent. People stopped debating whether Isabella deserved to be there and started discussing which piece they wanted to purchase. By 8 o'clock, small red dots appeared on the description cards. Sold, sold, sold. Isabella watched in disbelief as piece after piece found a buyer. Not because people felt sorry for her, because they genuinely wanted her art. Professor Chen found her near the end of the night. 12 pieces sold," she whispered, squeezing Isabella's hand. "Do you know what that means? You're not just a student anymore. You're a working artist, a successful one." Isabella looked around the gallery at all the people admiring her work, the same work that had been mocked on the sidewalk just months ago. The same drawings people had stepped over without a second glance. Now they hung in a museum. Now they sold for hundreds of dollars each. Now they mattered, but more than that, she mattered. Isabella Rodriguez mattered, not because someone rescued her, but because she never stopped creating, even when the world tried to make her invisible. The exhibition ran for 2 weeks, and every day brought something new. Journalists wrote articles about Isabella's story. Art blogs that had criticized her before suddenly praised her work. Schools invited her to speak to students about following their dreams. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. But the most meaningful moment came on the last day of the exhibition. Isabella was standing in the gallery, saying goodbye to her paintings one final time before they went to their new owners. When someone tapped her shoulder, she turned around and found herself face to face with the teenage boy who had mocked her on the street. The one who'd said his little sister drew better. He looked uncomfortable, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for what I said that day. I was being a jerk. Your art it's really good. Actually, it's amazing. I just, Wanted you to know that I was wrong. Isabella studied his face. She could tell the apology was real. He wasn't doing this because someone made him. He was doing it because he genuinely felt bad. Thank you, she said simply. I appreciate you telling me that. He nodded and walked away, and Isabella felt something inside her chest loosen. A knot of hurt she'd been carrying since that September day finally untangled. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about not letting the hurt control her anymore. The exhibition earned Isabella almost $40,000 after the Institute took their percentage. $40,000. It was more money than her mother made in a year working 2 jobs. More money than Isabella had ever imagined having. Her mother cried when David handed them the check. Real shoulder-shaking sobs that she couldn't control. This is going to change everything, she whispered. We can save this. For your future. For college. For whatever you need, but Isabella had other ideas. That night, she sat with her mother at their small kitchen table and pulled out a piece of paper. Mom, I've been thinking. We should use some of this money to help other people. Her mother looked confused. What do you mean, mija? I mean people like us. People at the shelter. Kids who have talent but no opportunities. What if we started a fund or something? To help them the way David helped me? Her mother's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time she was smiling. You have the biggest heart, Isabella. Yes, yes. We should do that. Over the next few months, with David's help, they established a small scholarship fund for young artists facing homelessness or extreme poverty. It wasn't huge, but it was something. It could buy art supplies for kids who couldn't afford them, pay for classes, give someone else a chance. Isabella never forgot where she came from. Even as her success grew, even as she continued taking classes and creating new work, she remembered what it felt like to be invisible. She remembered the cold sidewalk, the mocking laughter, the shame of wearing mismatched shoes. Every few weeks, she would go back to that same corner where David had found her. But now, instead of sitting there to draw, she would walk around looking for other kids, other artists, other invisible people that everyone else ignored. She found them too. A 15-year-old boy who played guitar on the subway platform, a girl about 10 who made jewelry out of found materials, a teenager who wrote poetry on scraps of paper. Isabella would stop and talk to them. Really talk. Really see them. Sometimes she'd buy their art. Sometimes she'd just encourage them. Tell them their work mattered. That they mattered. One cold Saturday in March, almost 6 months after David had first stopped to look at her drawings, Isabella brought Professor Chen with her on one of these walks. They found a young boy, maybe 9 years old, doing chalk drawings on the sidewalk. They were good. Really good. Detailed portraits of people walking by, captured in just a few minutes. What's your name? Isabella asked, crouching down beside him. Tyler, he said shyly. These are incredible, Tyler. Have you ever taken art classes? He shook his head. Can't afford it. But I like drawing anyway. Isabella and Professor Chen exchanged glances. How would you like some free lessons? Professor Chen asked. I teach at the Art Institute. We have a new scholarship program for young artists. I think you'd be perfect for it. Tyler's eyes went wide, just like Isabella's had 6 months ago. That same disbelief, that same hope fighting against years of disappointment. Really? He whispered. Really, Isabella said, smiling. She pulled out one of the scholarship applications they'd printed. Have your parents fill this out. We'll take care of the rest. As they walked away, Professor Chen put her arm around Isabella's shoulders. You know what David saw in you that day? She asked. Talent? Isabella guessed. More than that. He saw someone who understood pain but hadn't let it make them bitter. Someone who had every reason to give up but kept creating anyway. That's rare, Isabella. That's precious. And now you're passing it forward. That's what makes you truly special. Isabella's success continued to grow. She was invited to participate in group shows with adult artists. A small gallery offered to represent her work. Art colleges started sending her information, even though she was only 13 now, telling her they'd love to have her apply when she was older. But the moment that meant the most came 1 year after David had found her on that sidewalk. The Art Institute asked her to teach a special summer workshop for underprivileged kids. Kids from shelters, kids from foster care, kids who had talent but no opportunities. On the first day of the workshop, Isabella stood in front of 15 young people ranging from 8 to 17 years old. They looked at her with the same guarded expressions she used to wear. expecting disappointment, expecting to be let down, expecting nothing. I know what you're thinking, Isabella said quietly. You're thinking this won't matter, that nothing will change, that people like us don't get happy endings. She paused, looking at each face. I thought that too. A year ago, I was sitting on a sidewalk with colored pencil stubs drawing on cardboard, while people laughed at me and stepped over me like I was invisible. She saw recognition in their eyes. They understood. They'd been there too, in their own ways. But here's what I learned. You're not invisible. You never were. The problem wasn't you. It was that people weren't looking. They weren't really seeing. And yes, sometimes it takes someone special stopping and noticing. But you know what? Once one person sees you, really sees you, everything can change. She walked over to the supply cabinet and opened it, revealing shelves stocked with professional art materials. Everything in here is yours to use. Real paints, real brushes, real canvas. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you're artists. And artists deserve the tools to create. A small girl in the front row raised her hand. What if we're not good enough? She asked, her voice barely audible. Isabella knelt down beside her. Good enough for who? The people who ignore you on the street? The people who think poverty means you can't have dreams? She shook her head. You're good enough for you. That's all that matters. Create because it makes you feel alive. Create because you have something to say. Create because the world needs your voice even if it doesn't know it yet. Over the summer, Isabella watched these kids transform the same way she had. Not because she gave them anything they didn't already have, but because she helped them see what was already inside them. She taught them techniques, sure, but more importantly, she taught them that they mattered. On the last day of the workshop, they held a small exhibition of the students' work. Nothing fancy like Isabella's show had been. Just a classroom with drawings and paintings taped to the walls. But it was enough. Parents came. Teachers came. David came, of course, and he bought 3 pieces to hang in his office alongside Isabella's original drawings. Mrs. Liu from the bakery came too, carrying boxes of cookies for everyone. She hugged Isabella tight and whispered, I always knew you were special. I'm so proud of you. As Isabella looked around the room at these young artists showing their work with nervous pride, she thought about her father. He'd always told her that art was about more than making pretty pictures. It was about connecting with people, telling truths, making the invisible visible. She finally understood what he meant. Her art had started as a way to escape. Then it became a way to survive. Then a way to succeed. But now it was something more. It was a way to help others find their own light in the darkness. David found her at the end of the evening. You've come so far, he said, looking around at the exhibition, not just as an artist, but as a person. Because you stopped that day, Isabella replied. Because you looked when everyone else walked past. David shook his head. No, Isabella. I just saw what was already there. You did the hard part. You kept creating when the world told you not to. You kept hoping when you had every reason to give up. You turned pain into beauty. That was all you. As Isabella walked home that evening, passing the corner where her life had changed exactly 1 year ago, she stopped for a moment. The sidewalk looked the same. The buildings, the street, the whole neighborhood, all the same. But everything was different now. She wasn't that scared, invisible girl anymore. She was an artist. A teacher. Someone who could help others the way she'd been helped. And maybe that was the real happy ending. Not the money or the fame or the success, but the chance to take what had been given to her and pass it forward. Isabella smiled and kept walking, her heart full of gratitude and purpose, ready to see what beautiful things tomorrow might bring. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves a chance, and sometimes all it takes is one person stopping to look closer.